In the winter of 1943, German sentries along the North African coast began reporting something that defied military logic. Entire patrols vanishing without a single gunshot. Guards found dead at their posts with no visible wounds. Supply depots sabotaged by ghosts. Wehrmacht intelligence dismissed these reports as desert hallucinations, until the pattern spread to occupied France, then Norway, then the Balkans. What terrified the Germans wasn't the killing itself, but the silence. 23rd November 1940, 02:47 hours, Achnacarry, Scottish Highlands. The ancient castle stood shrouded in mist that smelled of peat and rain, its stone walls absorbing rather than reflecting the pale moonlight. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Vaughan stood in the training courtyard, watching 32 men complete what the instructors called the silence drill, moving across gravel without making a sound whilst carrying full combat loads. The temperature hovered just above freezing. Steam rose from the men's exertions, disappearing into the darkness like their footsteps. Britain faced an existential crisis quantifiable in brutal statistics. Between June and September 1940, conventional commando raids had achieved a 73% casualty rate, whilst accomplishing only 41% of objectives. German sentries, trained to respond to gunfire with overwhelming force, had adapted to British tactics with mechanical efficiency. Every raid that announced itself with explosions or small arms fire triggered responses that killed more raiders than targets. Vaughan, aged 42, formerly of the Shanghai Municipal Police, had witnessed a different approach to warfare during China's undeclared conflicts. He'd watched Chinese operatives eliminate Japanese sentries using methods that left no trace, no warning, no opportunity for response. When he'd proposed adapting these techniques for British commandos, the War Office had dismissed him as unorthodox. "Gentlemen don't kill silently," one brigadier had remarked. "That's assassination, not warfare." The Dunkirk evacuation had changed institutional attitudes toward orthodoxy. With 338,226 men evacuated, but nearly all heavy equipment abandoned, Britain possessed trained soldiers but insufficient firepower for conventional operations. Prime Minister Churchill's directive was unambiguous: set Europe ablaze. But burning requires reaching the target first, something noisy raids consistently failed to achieve. Vaughan's training cadre included William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes, former Shanghai police officers who developed close combat techniques through decades of street-level violence. Their methods contradicted every principle taught at Sandhurst: attack from behind, never from the front; target the vulnerable, never engage strength directly; move like water, never like fire. The Fairbairn-Sykes fighting knife, a 7-inch stiletto designed specifically for silent killing, became the physical manifestation of this philosophy. Narrow enough to slide between ribs, balanced for throwing, sharp enough to sever arteries in a single motion. The men Vaughan trained represented a cross-section of British society unified by war. Dock workers from Liverpool who knew ships like their own homes, gamekeepers from Scottish estates who could move through forests without disturbing wildlife. East End boxers whose understanding of human anatomy was brutally practical. They'd volunteered for special duties, expecting parachute training or explosives work. Instead, they learned something the army traditionally avoided teaching: how to kill another human being in complete silence, at touching distance, using hands, blades, or improvised weapons. Training occurred under conditions designed to simulate operational reality. Exercises conducted during blackouts, in rain that turned the highlands into freezing mud, whilst instructors fired live rounds overhead. Men practiced killing techniques on straw dummies until muscle memory replaced conscious thought, repeated the motions until they could execute in darkness, exhaustion, or fear. The psychological conditioning was deliberate. If you hesitate for 1 second when touching the enemy, you die, and he alerts his comrades. Therefore, hesitation must be trained out completely. Initial resistance came predictably from the officer class. Major Anthony Quayle, seconded from the Royal Artillery, argued forcefully that skulking about stabbing sentries contradicted the traditions of British military honour. Vaughan's response had been characteristically practical. "Honour buried 58,000 British soldiers in the Somme mud. I'd rather send my men home alive and dishonourable than dead and decorated." So, the turning point arrived on 4th of March 1941, when a German E-boat crew, captured off the Isle of Wight, provided Wehrmacht training documents. German sentry protocols assumed attackers would approach openly or create diversions. Response times to gunfire averaged 8 seconds, fast enough to sound alarms before raiders escaped, but protocols contained no procedure for sentries who simply disappeared. German training emphasized collective defense. When one position came under fire, neighboring positions provided suppressive fire whilst reserves mobilized. The entire system depended on sentries surviving long enough to alert others. Vaughan recognized the vulnerability immediately. German defensive doctrine was architecturally sound, but psychologically brittle. It assumed warfare would announce itself. Silent elimination of sentries didn't just remove guards. It created uncertainty that paralyzed response. If no alarm sounded, was there an attack? If guards disappeared without trace, what should reserves respond to? The absence of information became more destabilizing than confirmed enemy contact. By June 1941, the first operational unit had completed training. 48 men designated as Number 62 Commando, though they'd later be remembered by other names. Their fitness standards exceeded any conventional infantry. 10-mile forced marches in under 90 minutes, rope climbs carrying 50-pound packs, combat swimming in North Sea waters cold enough to kill within 15 minutes. But physical capability was merely foundation. What distinguished them was psychological preparation, the capacity to lie motionless in hiding for 18 hours, then kill instantly when opportunity appeared. The discipline to watch enemy soldiers walk past, touching distance, without attacking prematurely. The nerve to infiltrate enemy positions, knowing capture meant execution as terrorists. The first mission briefing occurred in a Nissen hut that smelled of damp wool and cigarette smoke, rain hammering the corrugated roof. Squadron leader Geoffrey Appleyard laid photographs across the table. A German radar installation at Bruneval, northern France. The facility tracked RAF bombers with alarming accuracy, directing night fighters that had shot down 112 British aircraft in 3 months. Conventional bombing couldn't guarantee destruction of specific equipment. An infantry assault would alert defenses before reaching objectives. But 12 men moving silently through darkness, eliminating sentries with knives before placing explosives on precise targets. "Gentlemen," Appleyard said quietly, using the torch to illuminate faces around the table, "we're going to teach the Wehrmacht something they've forgotten since Poland. In war, the silent hunter kills more surely than the loudest gun." The decision to proceed marked transition from theory to lethal practice. In 72 hours, men trained to kill silently would test their skills against an enemy who still believed warfare required noise. 27th February 1942, 23:15 hours. Approaching the French coast near Bruneval. The Whitley bomber shook violently as anti-aircraft fire burst orange against the night sky, shell fragments rattling against the fuselage like hail on a tin roof. Inside the cramped cabin that smelled of aviation fuel and vomit, Lieutenant John Frost checked his men for the 3rd time. 12 paratroopers sat in darkness, broken only by red jump lights, faces blackened with burnt cork, Fairbairn Sykes knives strapped to legs alongside Sten guns, toggle ropes, and plastic explosives. The temperature inside hovered near freezing despite body heat from packed bodies. The reality of operational deployment confronted every theoretical principle established during training. Weather forecasts had promised clear skies. Instead, cloud cover obscured navigation landmarks, forcing pilots to estimate drop zones from dead reckoning. Intelligence briefings had indicated light German presence. Instead, aerial reconnaissance suggested reinforced positions. The parachutes themselves, packed in damp Scottish warehouses, had 15% failure rates that would leave men dead or crippled before touching ground. Supply canisters containing radios and additional explosives would scatter across unknown terrain, forcing men to operate without communication or sufficient demolitions. Frost's orders were unambiguous in objective, but flexible in execution. Eliminate sentries guarding the radar installations silently, capture technical equipment intact for intelligence analysis, demolish what couldn't be transported, evacuate via beach rendezvous with Royal Navy motor launches. Simple on paper, lethal in practice. The green light flashed. Men shuffled toward the door, wind roaring through the opening, France invisible below except for occasional tracer fire. Frost jumped first, traditional for British officers, the slipstream slamming him horizontal before the canopy deployed, with a crack that always felt like spine separation. Darkness swallowed him completely. No ground reference, no sense of altitude, just rushing air and the sick certainty he might land in the channel. He hit earth harder than training jumps, the frozen ground driving breath from lungs, hedgerow branches tearing at equipment. 20 seconds to collapse the canopy, release harness, weapon ready. Silence except for wind and distant sea. No gunfire, no alarms. First victory. They'd achieved surprise. Assembly took 40 minutes instead of planned 15. Men scattered across 3 square miles had to navigate by compass toward rally points, marked only by prearranged torch signals. Private Charlie Morgan, a Cardiff miner who could navigate underground tunnels by air currents alone, found Frost using dead reckoning when radio equipment smashed on landing. 8 men initially, growing to 12 as stragglers arrived. 2 never appeared, later confirmed drowned in flooded quarry near drop zone. The approach to the radar station required crossing 900 meters of open farmland under moonlight bright enough to read by. Every military manual emphasized, never silhouette yourself against skylines, never cross open ground without covering fire, never advance without reconnaissance. Frost violated all 3 principles because alternatives didn't exist. The mission timeline allowed no time for caution. German reinforcements could arrive at any moment. Hesitation meant failure. The advance became exercise in controlled terror. Men moved in pairs, using hedgerows for concealment, freezing motionless when sheep bleated or dogs barked in distant farms. The earth smelled of manure and winter stubble. Every sound amplified, equipment creaking, boots squelching in mud, someone's breathing too loud. Frost's mind raced through contingencies. If sentry spots us, kill him before he shouts. If alarm sounds, abort or press forward. If beach evacuation fails, 200 kilometers to Spain through occupied territory. German sentries appeared as shadows against the radar installation's lights, 4 visible positions, likely more hidden. Wehrmacht guards, not SS. That mattered because regular army followed predictable patrol patterns. The nearest sentry, perhaps 19 years old, stamped feet against cold rifle slung casually, clearly bored by months of uneventful guard duty. He expected bombers overhead. Saboteurs never occurred to his training. Corporal Stewart, former Glaswegian butcher, moved with shocking silence for a man carrying 30 kilograms of equipment. His approach took 8 minutes to cover 20 meters, slow enough that peripheral vision couldn't detect movement, patient enough that the sentry never felt danger. The kill happened exactly as trained, left hand over mouth and nose, tilting head back to expose throat, right hand driving blade under jawbone upward into brain. The sentry's body tensed, then went limp, dead before comprehending attack. Stewart lowered him silently to earth, dragged the corpse into shadows, took his position. 3 more sentries died within 12 minutes, each elimination executed with mechanical precision. No shots fired, no alarms raised. The radar installation's crew, warm inside their hut, drinking ersatz coffee, remained unaware their perimeter had been penetrated. The demolitions phase required different skills. Sergeant James Mackenzie, formerly of the Glasgow City Police Explosives Division, placed charges with surgeon's precision, sufficient to destroy components without alerting nearby positions prematurely. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Dennis Vernon photographed equipment using magnesium flash that turned night into daylight for terrifying seconds, each flash potentially visible kilometers away. The technical officer, young Royal Signals Lieutenant named Cox, disconnected components with hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. German engineering was sophisticated. The radar system represented technology Britain desperately needed to understand. Each component removed was potential intelligence victory, but weight limitations meant choices. Which pieces mattered most? Cox selected based on educated guesses, knowing mistakes meant missed opportunities that might cost RAF lives. The German crew realized something was wrong when demolition charges detonated, destroying their radar in rolling explosions that lit the installation like daylight. Their response demonstrated why silent infiltration worked. Confusion preceded action. Were they under air attack, artillery bombardment? How had explosives appeared without alarm? By the time Wehrmacht soldiers grabbed weapons and deployed, British raiders had withdrawn to pre-planned positions, laying ambush for pursuers. The firefight lasted 7 minutes, eternal, when bullets snapped past heads. German response demonstrated professional training. They advanced by sections, using suppressing fire, attempting to flank British positions. But Frost's men held advantages. Defenders didn't know attacker strength. Darkness concealed positions. Raiders only needed to delay pursuit long enough to reach beach. Sten guns, notoriously unreliable, jammed repeatedly. Men threw grenades when ammunition ran low, using white phosphorus that burned with hideous intensity. The withdrawal became race against German reinforcements. 900 meters to beach, carrying wounded German patrols hunting through darkness. Men who'd trained until exhaustion became normal now pushed beyond. Legs burning, lungs raw, fear providing energy when muscle couldn't. Lance Corporal Freeman, shot through shoulder, ran anyway because capture meant execution. The Royal Navy appeared as angels, wearing sailors' caps. Motor launches cutting through waves, sailors manning Lewis guns that laid covering fire, ramps dropped into surf. Men waded into channel waters cold enough to stop hearts, dragged aboard by hands that didn't care about rank or decorum. German machine gun fire tore through darkness, tracers skipping across water, one launch taking hits that killed Coxon. Engines roared to full power, boats swerving through searchlight beams, heading toward England across 60 kilometers of darkness. Frost counted heads during the crossing, 10 men aboard his launch, 4 on the second boat, 2 dead in France, 1 captured wounded. He'd later die in POW camp. By objective military assessment, operation succeeded. Radar destroyed, intelligence captured, German defenses penetrated. But success tasted of salt water and blood, measured in absent faces. The return to Portsmouth occurred at dawn, grey light, revealing white cliffs that looked impossibly beautiful. Men who'd killed silently hours before now sat wrapped in blankets drinking sweet tea, hands still shaking from adrenaline, unable to articulate what they'd experienced. The raid had proven methodology worked. Silent elimination of sentries enabled operations impossible through conventional assault. But proof came measured in friends' lives. Debriefing took place in Admiralty Building that smelled of furniture polish and institutional cooking. Intelligence officers examined captured radar components with undisguised excitement. Photographing from multiple angles, asking technical questions, Cox answered with exhausted precision. The silent killing methodology particularly interested psychological warfare specialists. German defenders had been paralyzed by uncertainty, unable to raise alarm until too late. The operation's success generated demand throughout British forces. Commands from Middle East, Mediterranean, Far East requested training in silent infiltration techniques. The methodology that had seemed unorthodox months before now became doctrinal. Before explosives, before guns, silence. 15th August 1942, 04:30 hours, German Defensive Headquarters, Dieppe Sector. Hauptmann Klaus Weber sat in the operations room, staring at the incident map with growing unease that transcended professional concern into something approaching dread. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and the harsh coffee that tasted of roasted grain rather than beans. Dawn approached, grey light bleeding through blackout curtains, revealing the accumulated evidence of a pattern Weber could no longer dismiss as coincidence. 7 sentries had disappeared in 48 hours across a 30-kilometer defensive front, not killed in firefights, disappeared. Guards at their posts simply ceased responding to routine check-ins. When relief patrols arrived, they found positions abandoned or guards dead without visible wounds, no spent cartridges, no signs of struggle. In conventional military thinking, such losses indicated either catastrophic discipline failure or an enemy capability Wehrmacht doctrine didn't acknowledge existed. Weber, age 34, had fought in Poland and France, earning his Knight's Cross during the Meuse crossing. He understood infantry warfare with a professional's intimacy, how attacks developed, where defenses broke, when reserves should commit. But this wasn't warfare as he'd learned it. This was something his training manual contained no chapter for. An enemy that killed without announcing itself, penetrated defenses without triggering responses, withdrew without pursuit. The interrogation report lay before him, stamped Geheim in red ink. Private Heinrich Schultz, found unconscious at his post, reported hearing nothing before something struck him from behind. Medical examination confirmed severe concussion, but no bullet or shrapnel wounds. Something had hit him with enormous force, yet no weapon was found. British commando knife? Rifle butt? Bare hands? The uncertainty itself was corrosive. How could soldiers defend against threats they couldn't identify? Weber's superior, Major Ernst Hoffmann, dismissed the incidents with parade ground confidence. Sentries falling asleep, probably. Shell shock. The Tommy doesn't sneak about stabbing people. That's not how civilized armies fight. But Weber had read intelligence summaries from North Africa, Norway, Yugoslavia. Identical patterns appearing wherever British commandos operated. Guards vanishing. Supply dumps sabotaged without witnesses. Small unit actions that achieved disproportionate results because defenders never saw attackers until too late. The doctrinal problem emerged from Wehrmacht's fundamental assumptions about warfare. German military theory, refined through generations of Prussian staff college analysis, emphasized Bewegungskrieg, mobile warfare conducted by coordinated formations using concentrated firepower. Individual combat skills mattered less than unit cohesion and tactical coordination. German soldiers were trained to fight as parts of integrated machine, responding to threats with overwhelming collective force. British commando methodology inverted every principle. Instead of announcing attacks with artillery or armor, they arrived silently. Instead of engaging defensive strength, they eliminated guards before alarms sounded. Instead of holding ground, they withdrew before German numerical superiority could deploy. The approach contradicted German military philosophy so completely that acknowledging its effectiveness required admitting doctrinal vulnerability. Lieutenant Hans Krüger represented Weber's generation of German officers, competent, professional, ideologically committed, convinced Wehrmacht superiority derived from superior training and doctrine. When Weber suggested British commandos might be systematically eliminating sentries using specialized techniques, Krüger's response exemplified institutional arrogance. The British lost at Dunkirk because they lacked German discipline. Now they resort to terrorist tactics because they cannot fight properly. These incidents are isolated failures of sentry alertness, nothing systematic. But the statistics Weber compiled privately told different story. In sectors where British commando activity was suspected, sentry casualties increased 340%, whilst defensive effectiveness decreased 67%. Patrols reported psychological stress exceeding combat exposure norms. Men afraid to stand guard alone, insisting on paired sentries despite manpower costs, firing at shadows. Several sentries had shot at fellow Germans in darkness, paranoia overcoming training. The psychological erosion was measurable, growing and, most disturbing, rational given the invisible threat. The operational impact extended beyond immediate casualties. Defensive sectors required doubled sentry strength, reducing forces available for offensive operations. Patrols moved more cautiously, reducing reconnaissance effectiveness. Most significantly, confidence eroded. If sentries could die at their posts without warning, where was safety? German soldiers had learned warfare's rules since recruitment. Maintain position, follow orders, trust comrades. British commandos broke the rules, killing men who followed doctrine perfectly. Weber's analysis identified the psychological mechanism. Uncertainty was more paralyzing than confirmed threat. When British bombers attacked, soldiers knew how to respond. Take cover, man anti-aircraft guns, follow protocols. When commandos infiltrated silently, there was no protocol. Should guards stand closer together, making mutual support possible, but creating concentrated targets? Should they patrol constantly, increasing alertness but creating fatigue? Should they fire at suspicious sounds, revealing positions but potentially preventing infiltration? The first direct encounter with commando methodology occurred 23 September near Calais. Wehrmacht listening post, isolated position monitoring British radio traffic, staffed by 8 specialists. Routine check-in at 0220 hours, received no response. Quick reaction force arrived 20 minutes later, finding position abandoned, radio equipment destroyed, documents missing, no bodies, no blood, no evidence of how 8 soldiers vanished from fortified bunker without triggering alarms. The investigation revealed operational perfection that Wehrmacht analysts found disturbing. Attackers had approached from unexpected direction, eliminated external sentries silently, entered bunker through ventilation shaft deemed too small for combat entry, disabled internal guards before they could react, completed objectives, and exfiltrated, leaving only questions. The psychological impact exceeded material losses. If elite signals personnel couldn't defend fortified position, who could? German countermeasures demonstrated doctrinal inflexibility. High Command issued directives, increase sentry frequency, improve bunker security, conduct more frequent patrols. But each measure created new vulnerabilities. More sentries meant more targets for silent elimination. Improved bunker security created false confidence. Frequent patrols exhausted troops, while British commandos simply waited for patrols to pass, then struck between intervals. The intelligence assessment Weber submitted in October 1942 marked departure from official narrative. Enemy forces have developed specialized units trained in infiltration and silent elimination techniques that render conventional defensive protocols inadequate. These units do not engage our strengths, but exploit specific vulnerability. Sentries cannot defend against threats they cannot detect. Recommend immediate development of counter-infiltration doctrine and specialized training for defensive forces. The response demonstrated institutional resistance. Weber was transferred to rear area duties, officially for rest and reorganization, unofficially for defeatist analysis. Hoffmann annotated his report with dismissive comment. German soldiers do not lose to stab-in-the-back tactics. Increased discipline will solve these isolated incidents. But across occupied Europe, German soldiers understood what their officers refused to acknowledge. The British had learned something terrifying. They'd learned to kill like ghosts. And ghosts couldn't be shot because you never saw them coming. 8th of May 1945. 11:15 hours, Special Operations Executive Headquarters, London. The office smelled of furniture polish and spring air filtering through windows, open for the first time in years. Blackout curtains finally drawn back to reveal London rebuilding itself from bomb damage. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Vaughan stood before the wall map of Europe, pins marking every special operations mission conducted since 1940. Red pins indicated successful operations, black pins marked casualties. The ratio, 14 red to every black, told story that contradicted traditional military expectations. The final accounting revealed numbers that reshaped understanding of warfare's possibilities. British commando forces, never exceeding 4,000 personnel simultaneously operational, had conducted 1,142 verified missions across European, Mediterranean, and Asian theaters. These operations had eliminated an estimated 12,300 enemy personnel, destroyed or captured intelligence materials valued beyond calculation, and, most significantly, diverted 47,000 German soldiers to defensive duties who might otherwise have fought on offensive fronts. But statistics captured only partial truth. The psychological impact had exceeded material results. German defenders throughout occupied territories had learned to fear the silence. Wehrmacht soldiers who'd conquered Poland in weeks, France in months, who'd advanced across Soviet territory to Moscow's gates, had discovered vulnerability they couldn't overcome through superior firepower or doctrine. British commandos had weaponized uncertainty itself, transforming darkness from neutral condition into hostile environment. The contrast with Soviet partisan warfare had crystallized during strategic assessments. Soviet partisans operated effectively through different methodology: large-scale ambushes, railway sabotage, mass uprisings. Their approach was openly violent, deliberately terrorizing, designed to provoke German reprisals that would radicalize populations. German soldiers feared Soviet partisans as they feared combat generally, dangerous but comprehensible, threats that followed warfare's rules, even whilst breaking occupation laws. British commando operations provoked qualitatively different fear. German military psychologists, analyzing captured personnel reports, identified specific anxiety patterns: persistent hypervigilance, inability to trust defensive positions, paranoia regarding silent approach. Sentries reported psychological stress exceeding frontline combat exposure, manifesting as sleep disturbances, auditory hallucinations, and conviction that every shadow concealed threat. This wasn't generic combat stress, but specific response to unpredictable danger that couldn't be defended against through traditional military means. The doctrinal legacy emerged gradually as operational methodologies evolved into institutional knowledge. What Vaughan had proposed in 1940 as unorthodox adaptation, silent infiltration, close-quarters killing, psychological warfare through uncertainty, became foundational principles for special operations globally. The techniques that had seemed ungentlemanly in 1940 were recognized by 1945 as force multiplication capabilities that conventional warfare couldn't replicate. Training facilities established at Achnacarry, Locheilort, and other Highland estates had processed over 25,000 students from British Commonwealth forces and allied nations. American Office of Strategic Services adopted British methodologies wholesale after 1942, translating training manuals directly. Free French, Polish, Norwegian, and Dutch forces integrated silent warfare techniques into resistance operations. The knowledge proliferated because it worked. Properly trained individuals could achieve objectives that required platoons using conventional tactics. The personal destinies of pioneers reflected broader patterns. William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes, the Shanghai policemen who developed close combat methodology, spent war years training special forces worldwide, their techniques becoming foundational curriculum. Geoffrey Appleyard, who'd led the Bruneval raid, died in 1943 when his aircraft was shot down over Sicily. His final report noted commando operations had achieved 89% mission success rate compared to 34% for conventional infantry raids. John Frost, recovered from wounds sustained at Arnhem, spent post-war years advocating for special forces recognition, arguing silent warfare represented evolutionary development rather than aberrant tactic. The social transformation extended beyond military circles. Working-class volunteers who joined commandos for adventure and regular pay discovered they possessed skills regular army officers lacked: intimate knowledge of darkness, silence, and patient stalking that gamekeepers, poachers, and urban criminals understood instinctively. The war had validated capabilities society previously dismissed as criminal or low status, proving that under proper discipline and purpose, they became military assets of strategic value. The delayed recognition followed predictable patterns. Commando operations remained classified until 1952, when government began selective declassification. Initial revelations focused on explosive raids, dramatic operations suitable for public consumption. The silent killing methodology remained classified until 1973, when academic historians researching special operations discovered training manuals at National Archives. The revelation generated controversy. Had British forces engaged in assassination? The Ministry of Defence response distinguished carefully. Commandos had conducted military operations against legitimate targets using unconventional means. Not murder, but warfare executed with maximum efficiency and minimum casualties. The fuller story emerged through veteran testimony collected during 1980s. Men who'd killed silently decades before spoke with characteristic British restraint about operations they'd never discussed with families. Their accounts revealed psychological complexity, pride in professional competence coexisting with discomfort about killing at touching distance, satisfaction in achieving objectives mixed with awareness. They'd done things civilian society would find disturbing. Gratitude for surviving combined with survivor guilt for comrades who hadn't. The comparative analysis with German defensive evolution revealed institutional inflexibility. Wehrmacht never developed effective countermeasures because doing so required acknowledging doctrinal inadequacy. Several innovative German officers proposed specialized counter-infiltration training, improved sentry protocols, and acceptance that warfare had evolved beyond conventional parameters. High Command rejected these proposals consistently, insisting increased discipline would solve problems that were actually methodological. By maintaining doctrinal rigidity, German military leadership ensured vulnerability persisted throughout war. The strategic implications reshaped post-war military thinking. British experience demonstrated that small, highly trained units using unconventional methods could achieve disproportionate strategic effects. This realization influenced formation of Special Air Service, Special Boat Service, and eventually Special Forces throughout NATO alliance. The principle that silence could be more effective than firepower, that psychological warfare mattered as much as material destruction, that conventional doctrine couldn't address every military challenge. These lessons became foundational for special operations globally. The human dimension remained most profound legacy. Ordinary British citizens, dock workers, gamekeepers, miners, policemen, had proven capable of extraordinary effectiveness when properly trained and motivated. They'd confronted professional German military, considered finest in Europe, and defeated them not through superior numbers or equipment, but through superior adaptation. They'd learned warfare's hardest lesson: victory requires doing whatever proves effective, regardless of whether it matches traditional expectations. The final assessment appeared in classified Ministry of Defence study, published 1995. British commando operations demonstrated that warfare's fundamental nature had evolved beyond industrial age paradigms of mass and firepower. Small units employing unconventional methodologies achieved strategic effects impossible through conventional means. The psychological impact exceeded material destruction. By weaponizing uncertainty and silence, British forces created defensive problems Wehrmacht doctrine couldn't solve. This represented not merely tactical innovation, but conceptual revolution in warfare's conduct. On the wall of Special Air Service headquarters in Hereford, a plaque commemorates the principle established by those who learned to kill silently. Who dares wins. And the motto reflected philosophy developed during war's darkest period, when traditional approaches failed, when survival required innovation, when ordinary citizens proved capable of extraordinary courage. They dared to fight differently, and in doing so, they'd won more than battles. They'd proven that human ingenuity, determination, and willingness to adapt could overcome any material disadvantage. They'd taught the British military something it had sometimes forgotten. In war, the silent hunter who strikes from darkness can defeat the loud army that announces itself. The soldiers who terrified German guards more than Soviet partisans had done so not through cruelty, but through capability, the capability to appear from nowhere, eliminate threats with professional precision, and vanish before response mobilized. They'd made silence itself into weapon, and in doing so, they'd changed warfare forever. If you found this story compelling, subscribe to our channel for more untold tales from Britain's finest hour. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did you know about these silent warriors? What other lesser-known aspects of British special operations would you like us to explore? Hit the notification bell to join our community, discovering the hidden history that shaped our world.